Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to this week's Q&As. It is freezing in New York this week, which is funny because usually my apartment is sweltering and I'm in a t-shirt in the middle of the winter, but not today. You got me in a hoodie. So let's get through this without freezing to death, and hopefully everybody is warm and safe wherever it is that they are. All right, let's start with a question from Subscribestar. Just a quick reminder to everybody, I'm going to be on whatever funding platform there is. I'm completely agnostic to them. I don't want to take sides on any of them, and I just really appreciate everybody's support. If you can support wherever it is that you can, whatever's the easiest for you works for me. So thank you very much to everybody. But on to the question. The importer asked, do I know of a list of compatible controller converters that will work with the DE10 Nano, the MiSTer project? He's looking to plug a bunch of different consoles into it and doesn't want to invest in the expensive Bliss box. So I haven't tested many on there. I've been concentrating on just using USB controllers until there's a different solution that we could go about using this with. I know there's a few people working on their own different types of controller adapters, but in my opinion, what would be the best is to have some kind of pin configuration that people agree on, or multiple, it doesn't have to be one, and then we all fasten our own connectors based upon that. So for things like the MC Cthulhu or the Brook Retro, they use just RJ45 cable, and one end is RJ45, the other is controller. So there's no reason why you couldn't basically make an extension cable with one end being the console, the controller port, and the other end being the network cable. And also, there's also no reason you couldn't just use the Bliss box adapters. And while I agree the Bliss box is expensive, no disrespect to Sean, I've known him for a few years now. He was one of my first interviews, but some people find it easier to use than others. So I understand why people wouldn't want to invest in all that. But the bottom line is, he's been making these controller adapters in very high quality for a long time. So another thing I would like to see is just a basic adapter that allows you to go from controller to the Bliss box pass-throughs to whatever this new format is. So that's what I would rather people concentrate their time and effort on. Just a way to get as direct a signal as possible into the DE10 Nano without using USB processing at all. To answer your direct question, though, no, I don't know of one, and it might be hard to find one cheaply that doesn't add a bunch of lag. So, of course, there's the RAFnet controllers, which are all excellent. I believe he has some extensive lag tests posted along with each one, and I think he got it down to like 4 milliseconds of lag or something. I could be wrong, but it's low. I mean, it's as low as one could reasonably ask for using a device like that. But the Mayflash ones, there was one that I used, G-Tech, I think it was called, or something, that had like a couple of frames of lag. So, for now, to be honest, if you're worried about spending money on an expensive adapter, for now I would buy a very cheap USB controller. I like the SNES one. I don't know what I did with mine. It was right here. I was just soldering something into it a minute ago. I like the SNES style USB one for almost everything. You can get a bunch of different ones. Get just cheap ones for now. Save your money and invest in whatever is going to be the direct controller solution. So things that don't go from controller to USB to DE10 Nano. And the only people who I wouldn't advise that to are people that want to use it across a wide variety of devices. So if you say, well, I have a really awesome PC emulation rig, and I play PC games, and I have a Raspberry Pi, and I want the DE10 Nano, maybe look into the RAFnet USB converters, and if retrousb.com, the same person who does the AVS, if they have any available, check into those. Or, I mean, to be honest, even some of the Bluetooth ones with an adapter, as long as it's easily syncable and you don't need PC software to do it. Just, for the short term, I would either suggest waiting until you get your the best controller adapters designed for the MiSTer platform, or get good stuff that's just reasonably priced that can go across all platforms, and just some cheap thing in the intro. So I hope that wasn't too long and ranty. I just wanted to be very clear because it's always such a challenge for me to make recommendations when I know there's something really good coming over the horizon. It just so often I've said, just wait a little longer, and it's been a year and a half and we still don't have it. Or I guess 2.5 years in one of those cases. So I just wanted to make sure to lay out all the options so anybody watching would be able to get a decent sense of it all. David A. asked, sadly, I don't own a NES or Famicom anymore. What would be reasonably priced options to play my games with a good RGB signal? I mean, if you like tinkering, try the MiSTer platform and see where that goes. But if you're talking about original cartridges and stuff like that, as most of us would, if you're specifically saying RGB, that's kind of a hard one. If you don't mind that it's HDMI, I love the Retro USB AVS. I believe they're back in stock or coming back in stock. There's zero lag, 720p. It's a great device, and it plays both NES and Famicom. I've reached out to Brian the creator a lot about adding 480p and 240p modes. And I even offered to talk to cable manufacturers as well as test for free myself and make him an HDMI to SCART cable for people who want to buy his AVS, set it to 240p and have it output RGB. And I was shut down with a hard no every time. So maybe I'll ask him again. Because at the moment, unless I'm missing something, unless I'm forgetting, there is no good aftermarket RGB NES anywhere. And, you know, as we all know, in order to get real hardware, you have to buy the NES RGB board. It's not too bad of an install if you have the right equipment. If you don't, it's a nightmare. There's so many things involved. So, you know, maybe politely tweet or email and ask if this is something that anybody else would be interested in. But I just felt that having the AVS, which is already a great platform, you know, 4 controller ports, supports both types of games, I really thought it would have been incredible to have 480p output. So you could just get a very cheap HDMI to VGA adapter, and now you could use old VGA monitors that look fine. I imagine even if there were scan lines with it, you could kind of fake the 240p look good enough. But I also really wanted one-to-one output, both for using RGB monitors and for the days when, you know, we have 8K as the norm. That way you could take a true digital original signal and manipulate it the way that you want it on your new display. So I really hope that we have something like that out there. I really hope that Brian will reconsider. I hope that Analog would consider not coveting their NT Mini and either re-releasing it for that high price, or I would actually prefer to see them make a cheap version of that with no extra features. So we'll see. I really hope all of that stuff eventually gets worked out, but at the moment there is no cheap, reasonably priced options to just go get NES RGB. I don't think I'm forgetting anything. I'm pretty sure I'm not. I think really if you just want cheap and easy, you know, emulation or Raspberry or the MiSTer platform, hardware emulation, which so far has been pretty awesome, or just, you know, picking up a NES or Famicom and playing via composite video until you have time to save up for an RGB mod. The GOAT was chiming in about our discussion over how to use the different control units for the BVM D32. I guess he said he has both control units, wants to use them both, and that's why he wants to know the pinouts. Well, stuff like this rarely falls out of my mouth. Usually I want to be the guy that mods and hacks everything I own. If you have a working D32, leave it alone. It's just my opinion. I'm just, you know, I'm being a little silly, but I'm serious. That's the most coveted CRT on the planet. I wouldn't mess around with any of this stuff. And if for whatever reason it's really important to you, try to find any other BVM that uses the same connector and test on that. Because I would cry if it turns out that I gave you advice on how to wire a connector, you plugged it in and it shorted something out on your D32. So if there was ever a time to leave good enough alone, if your control unit's working and the BVM is working, just leave it be and mess with other stuff. There should be pinouts in the service manuals. It should at least say it's a direct pass-through connector if that's the case. So you should be able to pick up something and just wire it up. But if I were you, if I were in your shoes, I would leave that thing alone and just enjoy it and know that everybody else on the planet that knows what one of those is wants one. Cole Voggs had a question about interference on the screen using a SNES and an OSSC. So I guess you already figured out the problem a little bit, so I just want to run through a few things that might help you or anybody else listening. You inquired about getting the Sync on Luma RGB cable, and that won't make a difference for anything to do with picture quality. The only time I've seen Luma cables lower the video quality was when it was just a really crappy cable. It wasn't from one of the good sellers, it was somebody just wired it up, and obviously that had nothing to do with Luma, that just had to do with the cable. So if you bought it from one of the respected resellers, I mean, that's not going to affect the video quality at all. The only thing it might affect is compatibility with random devices, but not the OSSC. That should never have a problem syncing on anything, really, as long as the voltage is correct, which it would be. But the problem that you had was a refresh line that will creep up the screen if you scroll your character for about a minute. Now, that could be a lot of different things. You said when you turned your TV into game mode, that stopped happening. So that could have, I mean, I guess it could be a frame buffer messing with things, but every time I hear of a horizontal line creeping up the screen, it's almost always the power supply. And every time I'm convinced it's not the power supply, it's the power supply. So even if you have an original, try one of the other ones that I've been using, the Power Plus. You might want to buy more than one because I've only had problems with one, and it was one that I kind of beat on. I used it on a lot of different machines. I'm constantly throwing it in my bag. But I have seen pictures online of people that they bought it, it didn't work, they opened it up, and like the capacitor was exploded on the inside, which also, who never knows? You never know what that's going to happen. But if you're going to buy one of these, buy one, maybe buy two. You require the adapters. I'll leave all the links to HD Retrovision on their website because Steve was the one that initially tested that. I would buy it, and I would buy that one just because it's great as a spare for many consoles. With the right pigtail adapters, you could use it on almost everything, just not the 5-volt Neo Geos. Those are one of the rare, don't ever use anything. So that's definitely the first thing that comes to mind. And, when I say every time I didn't think it was that, this is personal experience as well as friends. I had a Genesis a while back. I had the same power supply I'd been using for years, and out of nowhere, I get a horizontal line, and I'm going, well, it can't be the power supply, because that's always good. And then I swapped it out with a different one, and the problem went away permanently. So I tossed that other power supply. I probably should have just tried to do a cap replacement, but I guess I was feeling lazy. So try the power supply, and don't worry, you have a good setup. As long as you bought your cable from a respectable reseller, you should have no interference on the cable whatsoever. Lars Olschlager had some follow-up questions from last week. I think I'm getting your name sort of right. If not, feel free to make fun of me. It's totally cool, as long as you know I'm not making fun of you. So a few things. First, you had mentioned that you're using 100 Hertz Luva. And when you had asked the question last week, I forgot that there were certain models that had trouble with retro games. There's a YouTuber called RGB Rob that has tested a few of these things, and I think one of his videos was explaining why the 100 Hertz version didn't look right for 240p games. I'll try my best to find a link for you, but that's something that you should check out before you move forward with that. And I'm sorry I didn't remember last week. Next, you said you already adjusted the focus and was wondering why it could be so blurry. Maybe that's part of it. Definitely check that out. And you also said that it possibly could need convergence strips. The last time I looked, I didn't know of a source, but a friend of mine was using razor blades, magnets, and tape. That's definitely one you're going to want to Google, and that's kind of a painstaking process. So I wouldn't try adding convergence strips on anything unless you knew that everything else about that monitor was perfect. Otherwise, it might just kind of be a waste of time. Or good practice, depending on how you want to look at it and what the tube is, I guess. Also, you had asked, I'm going to skip this question to last. I'll go to the other one. You had asked if I had tried the custom firmware for the GBS 8220. No, I've never even used one of those things because when I first saw it, I saw that it had added lag and it processed 240p as 480i, and you still needed pin converters, so a cable that goes from SCART to VGA and all that. And every single time I bring this up, a lot of people always barrage me with messages about, oh, but it's awesome now. All you have to do is buy a Raspberry Pi and reprogram it. And, they list all of these ways to make the scaler useful and good. But in almost every scenario, it just ends up like, why wouldn't somebody just buy a RetroTink 2X or save up and get an OSSC? So no, I don't like them. I don't think that your average person would find that to be the best solution. There are definitely cases on where you would want to use one of those. Some of those custom firmwares the people have come up with are pretty cool that do different things. But for your average person, I would strongly recommend getting either the RetroTink or the OSSC, because you just plug it and go. And your last question, middle question that I'm answering last, was about CRT refreshers. So I think you mean CRT rejuvenators. And they're, if you know how to use one where you pull off the yoke and you put these things on to test the CRT itself, I think that they're great for testing. And I'm pretty sure it doesn't hurt the monitor at all to test, but to run the rejuvenation is dangerous. And I've run into a few cases already where, we had a BVM, let's just say, where it's, what's wrong with this thing? Do I recap all of the boards? Do I do all of this work just to find out that the tube is probably on its last leg and might only last a year? Or do we run the rejuvenation and see if that helps? And we ran the rejuvenation and it killed the tube. Now, in those specific cases that I'm talking about, I feel that it was the right move, because whether it was myself or other people involved who were about to drop a lot of money and a ton of time into refurbishing this entire monitor, all around a tube that turned out wasn't good anyway. But the problem is, what if it was the opposite? What if everything about the monitor was mint? What if all the caps were just replaced last year and for the past year everything seemed to be working good, and now something's a little weird? I wouldn't have done that. I would have just used the monitor until it died, knowing that the tube is on its way out. So just be very careful, because it is a very real fear that you'd kill a monitor, not because the rejuvenator killed it, but because maybe it had a year left or more if you don't game on it that often, and you just erased all of that from trying to fix it. So that's kind of a last resort type of thing. I know, I'm pretty sure Jose's used it in arcade machines, where it was a scenario where he was like, all right, we're one step away from throwing this tube out. Let's try one last thing and see if it helps. So I guess that's the best metaphor I can give you. If you're about to get rid of the entire CRT, and it's like, all right, we're going to throw this out anyway, let's see if this fixes it, that's, in my opinion at least, that's the right time to use it. And I think, overall you'd probably be happiest with it that way. So I'll leave a link to RGB Rob, and good luck on all of the different monitors you're working on, because that sounds awesome. I wish I had room for collections like that. Next, Jurika Miz has a question that I don't know if you're going to like the answer to. I'm sorry in advance. The question was, do you think I should keep or cancel my Polymega pre-order? Now, it's a long question, so I'll just concentrate on the answer, not rereading it. But basically, Jurika Miz already has a whole bunch of FPGA devices. So the Analog NT, the Super NT, the AVS, plus stuff like the PSIO, the SSDS3, all of the things that you would want to be able to have a great experience for original cartridges, original games, and all that stuff. So, I think there might be a place for the Polymega. I don't think it's the way they marketed it, and I think the way they went about things was amazingly shady, but I think there's absolutely a place for a device like that. I just don't think that device is for you. If you've already bought all the best stuff, that's going to be like a toy with a really cool box that you get to unwrap. And I know that hopefully doesn't sound too shitty. I want to be blunt. I mean, it's cool for people that don't have any of that and want to experience the games or use the different features or some of the potential stuff they were talking about. It seemed very ambitious and kind of cool, but the delays were always inevitable, and then they're dropping off the face of the planet, and then they're refusing to do interviews and all that stuff. I tried contacting them and they stopped responding. And it's not like we got into an argument or anything. We were planning on doing an interview, and then I think they must have Googled who I was and realized I was going to ask real questions, not like, what color is the box going to be? So, yeah, I don't think it's for you. I think that you've made all of the smart choices in retro gaming, And I think that if you wanted a fun toy to play with, you could get the Mister stuff right now. And while it's still very much a do-it-yourself, it's a work in progress. I mean, I was testing the other day and I ended up playing F-Zero for like 15, 20 minutes because it was just, I forgot I was playing on the Mister. I thought I was playing my Super Nintendo. So if you're looking to tinker with something and you want to mess around and have fun, I would pick that up today, and then wait till the Polymega comes out and see if it holds up to any of the things that they promised. So I wish I had a more positive opinion on this. I wish I could encourage you to keep it and use it for something, but it sounds like you already have a pretty awesome gaming setup, and this really wouldn't fit. Pablo Romero had a good question, a couple of good questions. He said he wants to try the other NES palettes on his NES RGB, and wants to know which ones I'm using and what to use to update the firmware. And if you can get it back if you flash the firmware wrong. So the NES palettes that I seem to always go to are the Firebrand X. Oh man, I'm embarrassed that I don't remember this now. I think it's the last one that he put out. And then also the Naked Arthur palette and the Sony palette. And strangely enough, I guess the Sony palette leans more towards blue, as Sony devices often do, and I think I just like blue. So that's probably why, but those were my go-to choices. If you're going to get the blaster, I would, especially if you don't mind tinkering, I would flash it with one of the PlayChoice 10 ones and just spend a few hours over the course of however long you have and play through some of the games with the arcade palette just to kind of feel what that was like, because I definitely remember being in the arcade as a kid and going, oh, hey, they have Super Mario here, and walking up to it and going, is there something wrong with it? Why does it look weird? In hindsight, it had to have been the color palette, whereas other games like Contra just look really cool. So I would try that just so that you know what it was like, and just so you could have a fun peace of mind. Because I know, I see you on Twitter. I know you're into this stuff. You'd probably appreciate that more than a lot of people. But then I would stick to Firebrand X, Naked Arthur, Sony, and you'll probably find one that your eyes like best that you could just leave it on. But some games you might still flip back and forth. But I think at the moment those are the three best. I vaguely remember people telling me that they bought the $4 cheap blaster on eBay, and that was fine for just the color palettes. So you wouldn't want to use that programmer on other devices. There are things that it wouldn't work at all, or it would do a bad job. But I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, it's been over a year since the last time I did it, that cheap adapter was fine for the palettes. But if you want to double check, I would message Firebrand X. He's very, you could message Tim Worthington too, but he probably won't respond. No disrespect to Tim, he's not much on social media. But Firebrand X is always willing to help, so maybe just double check with his opinion. But yeah, I would try those palettes, pick up the cheap blaster, and just double check that there isn't any issue, but I'm pretty sure the $4 one would be fine for your needs. Ludo had a great question, and I'm glad I get a chance to talk about this again. He's trying to mirror an RGBS signal, so not RGB-HV VGA, but just RGBS, to two arcade monitors or two RGB mounted TVs. The sources will be mainly arcade boards. Do I know of anything that people use? So Jose Cruz built something by hand to do this because a lot of people were just wiring outputs together. And not only does that make it very dark, but you're drawing twice as much power from those video chips and could potentially blow them out. And when I say potentially, I mean like there's a good chance you're going to do some damage doing that. Not a little chance, a good chance. So what I've always seen work really well is VGA splitters, distribution amps, and I think depending on how many is really the answer to your question. If you only need one input to two target sources, I would either use a G-SCART switch or just a VGA switch if you don't mind, a VGA distribution amp, sorry, if you don't mind making your custom cables, because then you'd have to wire it up to each. You could also use an Extron Crosspoint for this, because then you just put, once again, you'd have to wire custom cables, but you just get your RGB in, and you could have some of these cheap Crosspoints with 4 outputs. And since it's a matrix switch, if you really wanted to have a permanent installation, you can get one of the cheap 8x4s for like $50 now, and you could have 8 inputs going to 4 outputs in any order. So all the outputs can be showing the same thing, different things. So that's the safe way to distribute the signal. The only thing to keep in mind is you have to sync on composite sync, C-Sync, with almost all of these devices. If you try to use composite video as sync, such as like from a Super Nintendo, let's just say, it won't work. But if you're going from arcade boards, it won't be a problem. And if you're going from arcade boards, I don't think you're going to have to worry too much about the sync signals and everything going through the crosspoint. The only thing to remember is if you're going to arcade monitors, shouldn't be a problem as well. But if you're going to RGB modded TVs, you're going to want to make sure that all of those signals are not over the voltage limit for that device. And that's something that you would have to really, one of those cheap $100 scopes that I did the video on would totally take care of that. You could guess and just assume that it's going to be TTL and add a 480 ohm resistor, but I wouldn't guess with stuff like that. I mean, if you've taken the time to RGB mod your TVs, there could be some serious damage, and your work could be ruined. You could blow out the OSD chip. So I think I laid out a couple of decent options. I would just, if you're going to RGB modded TVs, maybe pick up one of those cheap scopes just to double check that the voltage is all the way it should be. A couple of questions from Alir. I'm so sorry, you even sent me the thing on how to pronounce your name, and my brain doesn't get it. I'm so sorry. Maybe send me the thing again, and I'll try my best next time. No disrespect whatsoever meant. But first question is the converters page on my site still up to date, or have there been any changes in the case of RGB to component converters? Yes, it is still up to date. The best ones are definitely still the HD Retrovision cables, which isn't technically fair because they're built specifically for these different consoles. As far as the generics go, the Shinybo performs the best. There's that one knockoff that with some mods could perform really well, but in my personal opinion, unless you enjoy projects like that, I wouldn't waste the time. I would just save up a little more cash and buy the Shinybo. And then there were a couple of fan-made solutions that, retro gaming fans that just weren't good. There was one out there that's been all over eBay that, the person won't take feedback. They say, like, well, everybody else likes it. I'm not going to bother. It's just upsetting, but whatever. So for that, yeah, if you just want a generic converter, stick with the Shinybo. And if you're really chasing down perfection and you need component, HD Retrovision is definitely the way to go. The only thing that might change this is Mike Chi was talking about a converter specifically with his RetroTink 2X in mind. So it might be a little bit better because while it's generic on the input, he's going to be specifically designing it for his device, allowing a cheap and easy way to get RGB into the RetroTink. So I think that's pretty cool. That's definitely going to be something worth watching out for, but that's not out yet, so that's why I'm saying stick with Shinybo at the moment. Second question, do I have the OSH Park link or design files for that PCB to upside down mount the Genesis 2 DIN where the RF hole of the Genesis 1 is? That is from DB Electronics. That's one of his open source designs, and I will try to remember to put the link, but if not, it's right on his page as well. And you'll notice on his on this GitHub page, there's a whole paragraph yelling at me because I always forget where to order certain things from. So not only did he put the part number as part of the name of it, there's a whole paragraph yelling at me. It made me laugh. And lastly, do I know where I can buy Saturn port female plugs? So I think you're talking about the video plugs. And no, and this was a problem that we ran into a few years ago when we were talking about potentially finding one standard for all consoles that don't come with DINs. And we looked into the Saturn ones, but they were just impossible to find, and the ones we did find were terrible quality. So no, I don't think you'd be able to find them. To be honest, that's why we all kind of said, When I say we all, I think we all kind of settled on the Mini DIN 8 for mods that don't have a specific DIN already assigned to them. For things like an Intellivision, just because you can get those. You can get a couple different versions of those, and the cable sellers are making it. So if you're looking for a replacement for your Saturn, maybe let me know and I could see if any of my friends have one from a motherboard that they were using. But if you were looking at for a specific project or something like that, then no, I'm sorry, I wouldn't even really know. I wouldn't know where to start for anything like that. Adam Brady asked, what's the difference between the SNES Super CIC switchless region mod, oh, did that on the first try, and the new FFVI man's SNES region mod? I have no idea. I know that he worked with Bordy to do some other updates on it, but I believe Chris wrote that article, and one of the things that out of all the stuff I know about the SNES, out of all the years I've been digging deep into it and know all these weird, useless facts that nobody cares about, I've done almost no region testing whatsoever. And it's just because I just didn't have a reason to up until now. So if Chris is watching this, maybe he could jump in, and so this would be responding to your post from last week's. But yeah, sorry, Adam. I just know that he'd worked with Bordy and he was trying to accomplish a few more different things. And I'd been bugging Bordy to maybe do one mod to rule them all. So something that looks like the Super CIC with the D-Jitter board, the video chip, the digital audio, everything all in one. With the most updated versions of each, just to kind of have one board to solder to, so there's less mess on the bottom of like a SNES Mini or something. But yeah, sorry. Clint Collage had two really good questions, and I have two meh answers for you. First, what's my opinion on adding an HDMI input to the OSSC in a future revision? I think it's necessary, and I think Marcus would definitely do it. I think for a million reasons it's necessary, but I don't think that this current revision of hardware could handle it. Now, I kind of half remembering here, so everything I'm about to say could totally be crap, but I think the way that it's set up now, all of the input pins are being used, and they wouldn't be able to dedicate any to HDMI. So it would require a different chip, a different board, and essentially an upgraded version of the OSSC. So I don't know if that's something Marcus is working on. I know that he had expressed interest the last time we did an interview in the next generation of hardware and what he was thinking about. So I'm not sure if there's going to be like an OSSC 1.5 before there's the 2. But if that's the case, yes, I would absolutely hope that he would include that. But whenever the OSSC 2 comes out, the 4K version, which might be years away, so please nobody think I'm talking about next week or anything, at some point between now and never, Marcus will probably do a 4K version that I can't imagine him not putting HDMI. I mean, it's absolutely necessary for a lot of the stuff that we do. So, yeah. So the answer is it's definitely going to happen and needed. I just couldn't even guess at a timetable. And your next question is, am I aware of any efforts to add a 1080p framed mode like Dan and Chris did on the DC HDMI? So I think you're talking about the 960p scaling for 480p. Because right now, I mean, everything kind of fits exactly the way it should. If you send a 4x 1080p signal, it comes in pretty perfectly and with bars on the top and the bottom. I don't know if it would be possible in a 960p mode for the current version of the OSSC. And I think, I'm kind of paraphrasing and half remembering here, but I think the way that the 480p doubling is done, I don't think you could draw in that extra line without a frame buffer in the current way that it's set up. So while it might be possible with current hardware, it's something that would definitely be possible on the next generation. I'm sure Marcus has thought of all of these things and listened to feedback, but in its current state, I'm not sure if just a firmware update would be able to accomplish that. I think the reason that Dan and Christoph were able to do it on the DC HDMI is because they have full control of the signal from the time it's just ones and zeros to the time it hits, the HDMI port, and they're able to add, stretch, and manipulate it any way they want. So I think it would be cool. I would like one of those. but I don't know if I would hold my breath for it on the current OSSC in the form that it's in. I could be totally wrong, and I hope I'm totally wrong. But so yeah, to answer both of your questions, you might have to wait quite a while for both of those. Sorry. Well, that's it for this week. For anybody new to the Q&As or new to the channel, if you have any questions whatsoever, post them wherever you found this video. So Subscribestar, Bitbacker, Patreon, whatever. Whatever it is, just post in the comments of this week's video, whatever the newest video is. And I don't go back to older videos to check comments there. There's a whole bunch of reasons why that just can't work. So if I missed your question, I'm sorry. It must have been because it came in after I started doing recording the video. But anything you want, just ask wherever you found this video, and just try not to do it on the YouTube video. I'm supposed to disable comments on all of these. Sometimes I forget and a comment or two come through, but this is a supporter Q&A. This is a small way to say thank you to everybody who gives support, and hopefully I could give back and help a little bit. And I find them really fun to do. So any questions at all, fire away wherever you found this video, and I'll see you next week.